Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I mentioned this in a recent video, but in high school, I got voted most stressed in the high school yearbook. It's definitely not something I'm proud of, but it's a reality that I tend to be stressed out. And I used to always tell myself that being stressed out was just a phase, something I was going through, and that eventually I would get over it. But the reality was, it wasn't just a state problem. It was partially a trait problem, that I tended to be stressed out, that I found ways to worry myself in situations because that's just how I worked. And that's even partially how I continue to work, but it's part of what pushes me forward. Anyway, my point is sometimes when we get into a rut, it's actually a sign of an underlying issue about how we approach our work or our relationships or our life in general. Usually being in a rut isn't just that you're having a stressful period of 2 weeks. It might actually say something about how we're approaching certain situations in our life, how we process information, how we tackle the problems we face, and how we manage stress. That being said, there's definitely such a thing as a rut. It's those times when that stress or that overwhelm gets worse and we just feel like we don't have that motivation or that momentum that maybe we usually do. So today I want to talk about specific ways to get out of a rut. And I do come from a place of having experience giving therapy and researching psychology, all while I was getting my PhD in clinical psychology. But of course, take this with a grain of salt. You need to figure out what actually works for you. So the first way to get out of a rut is to diagnose the problem. And no, I don't mean that literally like give yourself a diagnosis, but what I mean is figure out what's going on with you. Sometimes we try to solve a problem when we don't even really know what the problem is. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we can make in trying to get out of a rut. Of course, this is no substitute for getting professional mental health assistance, but I guess I mean there's still some stuff we can do for ourselves. Figuring out what the problem is so important in being able to do that. So I think there are a few questions you can ask yourself to identify the problem. The first question is, what type of emotion is coming up for me? Is it anxiety? Is it sadness? Is it anger? It might be more than one of these, but quite often there's a core emotion that's driving the others. So figure out what it is. In addition, you could ask yourself, what area of my life is contributing to that emotion most? Maybe it's your job and your work. Maybe it's your social life or your relationships or a particular relationship. Another question to help diagnose the problem is asking yourself, are there things I'm doing to contribute to the problem? Sometimes it's hard to face ourselves and realize that we may be doing something in our everyday life that's actually making the problem worse. So all those questions hopefully will lead you to some kind of answer about what is the core problem going on for you. Is it sadness because you feel isolated? Is it anxiety because you feel like your job is just putting too much on your shoulders? Is it fatigue because you're not finding time in your own life to have the space to relax and decompress? Simply saying you're in a rut could mean so many different things. And so I think it's critical that you actually nail down what specifically is going on for you. And there's a real power in naming specific emotions that really helps you identify what you can actually do to help solve the problem. Once you've identified the problem or the emotion that you're dealing with, a second step is to act opposite. And now this one I'm directly taking from DBT skills. If you're in the field, you know what I'm talking about. I'll put a link below to kind of like cite what I'm talking about. But it's a type of evidence-based therapy that really helps a lot with emotion regulation. And basically what this idea of acting opposite is after you've identified the emotion that you're dealing with most in a particular moment that's maybe leading you to be in this rut, act opposite of what that emotion tells you to do. So let me explain a little bit more, because some people misinterpret this and then use it to sort of justify impulsive or detrimental behavior. But what I mean is, If you're anxious, anxiety often leads us to want to avoid. Our first inclination is to try to avoid situations that lead to that anxiety. For example, if we have social anxiety, we might avoid parties. If what you're experiencing is anxiety, maybe that means that you actually need to approach, that you need to put yourself in that situation that you're anxious about so you can overcome that anxiety and feel the good that can come from experiencing something new or different. If you're feeling sad, quite often we want to withdraw. Quite often we want to stay at home and kind of do nothing. Maybe it means going out and doing something active. If you're feeling angry and you want to lash out and address the problem through anger and yelling, maybe it means take a step back and spend some time alone and kind of just recharge and let that anger subside before you take action in that situation. By identifying what emotion you're experiencing and then figuring out what that emotion is telling you to do and do the opposite, quite often you end up actually reducing the emotion in the long run. Now, I want to add the caveat that this is just for when emotions are running haywire. It's not necessarily everyday stuff. Like, I do think that sometimes our emotions can be very important for telling us what's good for us, what's bad for us. Sometimes when we have a negative gut feeling, maybe it's telling us to get out of a situation. So of course, on average, we should listen to what our emotions are telling us. But I guess I just mean if you just feel like you're in a rut where you keep going through the same cycle over and over again and it's not working, that's when acting opposite might be helpful. I swear I use acting opposite as a skill all the time, and it greatly improves my mood when I need it. A third way to get out of a rut is to problem solve areas you can control and to take action. This is really linked to intentionality rather than just going out and taking action. Really take the time to step back and look at what's happening after you've kind of diagnosed the problem, figure out what you can do in the moment that's actually going to help that problem. Sometimes it's hard to remember to do this. We just take action before we really think about it. And then we end up getting into the same cycles with the same problems and we get back into that rut. So just take the time to think about how could I approach things a little bit differently and what could I do to address the underlying drivers of this rut. My fourth tip is to take a break. And I know this one is so obvious, but sometimes I forget to do it. And then I just get all wound up and all stressed out. And I'm just left feeling the same way again and again. I think part of this is probably structuring it into your day, into your schedule, so that you can feel rejuvenated throughout the day and not just have that afternoon slump. My fifth strategy is to try out a new interest. Explore something you've always wanted to explore and pursue it. I think it's critical to find an outlet outside of what you usually do, to get excited about something, to learn something new. There's nothing like learning to rejuvenate yourself because it's both that feeling of accomplishment, like you've done something, and that is such a good feeling, but also that feeling of just getting out of what's normal for you. And that's where the sponsor of this video comes in. Skillshare is an online learning community with all kinds of classes in many different areas. They've got thousands of inspiring classes, including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and a lot more. Recently started taking Cook Perfect Pasta and Master Italian Sauces created by Steven La Rosa, who is a chef and content creator. It's just been a fun way to think about cooking and to learn a few new skills. But I think Skillshare is just such an incredible place to explore your interests in the comfort of your own home and learn a new skill. The first 1,000 people to use my link in the description box or my code SLICEOFLIGHT will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So if you're interested, give it a try. Anyway, back to my point, whether it's through Skillshare or some other way, pursuing your interests and just starting something new can be a great way to get out of a rut. Another strategy to get out of a rut is to do something physical. When you're just feeling stuck on a particular day, just go do something physical, whether it's going on a walk, going on a run, whether it's just doing a few jumping jacks or stretching a bit. I think sometimes doing something that makes our body just feel something different can be activating, can kind of distract you and just give you more energy. A seventh strategy for getting out of a rut is to do something social. I believe that as humans, we thrive off of social energy. We want to feel connected. We want to feel not alone. And I think talking to somebody, calling up a friend, getting together with someone you care about, or having a fun game night or something can be so rejuvenating. And it is so powerful in just getting your mind off of all the everyday to-dos. I also think sometimes when we get in a rut, it leads us to isolate ourselves. It leads us to kind of close up and to say no to social opportunities and to not be as motivated to go out and do things. But that's the opposite of what we should really be doing. I think surrounding ourselves with people who we enjoy, who we like, can be really impactful. Not that everyone, I think, is a clear introvert or a clear extrovert, but even if you consider yourself more of an introvert, I think it's still really rejuvenating and energizing to have some social interaction. We are human after all. The 8th tip is actually kind of the opposite, but it's also to do something alone and for yourself. I think I've mentioned in previous videos, but I found sometimes the early time in the morning, right after I get up and I'm ready to go, and I do some cleaning, or I go on a walk, or I listen to a podcast while I do some kind of task, it's just me time, and it's so enjoyable and rejuvenating. So while I do think it's important to be social and to be connected and to make sure you don't isolate yourself, definitely find time that's just for you, that's about relaxing and making sure that you have the energy to get done what you need to get done. And 9th tip is to do something creative. Something that tends to separate humans from at least a lot of other animals is our ability to create and to think creatively, the ability to produce art or to think about things from a different perspective. And I think sometimes just doing something creative, even if it turns out really badly, allows us to re-enter the mundane tasks of life with more energy and more satisfaction. Sometimes just doing something a little bit different and using your brain in a slightly different way allows you to get more into the flow of work a bit better. My 10th tip for getting out of a rut, and I think this is a very important one, is to consider your story and where you're deriving meaning from. Often we just go on autopilot throughout life and we don't think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we care about, what our values are, what our goals are, what we're pursuing, why we're pursuing it, and ultimately where we find meaning in our lives. I think taking the time to think about what is important to me, what's the legacy I want to leave in my life behind me. It doesn't have to be something grand or impressive. It might even be as simple as connecting with your family and being there for those you love. It doesn't have to be some high and mighty goal, but I guess I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the day-to-day of our jobs or in rising through ranks in some kind of company that we don't focus back on what's truly important to us and why we work so hard. Taking the time to look at our lives and think about our trajectory, what we want our story to be, and whether we're moving in that direction can help us readjust and refocus our energy. Sometimes we're not putting time into the things that actually matter to us. And sometimes even if we know deep down what's really important to us, we don't take the time to revisit it and to make sure that we're living according to those values. So just make sure if you're feeling in a rut, take those moments to think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? How am I spending my time? Is that consistent with my values? And how could I shift that a little bit if it's not? Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for you today, but I hope this was helpful in just helping you think about how to readjust your life to get out of a rut when you feel stuck. I also want to acknowledge that I used a lot of kind of psychological principles here, but if you're actually feeling really down, really anxious, or overwhelmed, it might also be time to seek real mental health treatment, and looking on YouTube is never a full substitute for that. So also keep that in mind if you feel like you're really struggling. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button. You can also subscribe below if you want more content on simple living, minimalism, and building an empowering mindset. I also have the links to my Instagram and Patreon below where you can find more content from me. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.